We see this kind of erasure happening all the time outside of the Holocaust as well, where people who, have definitely been victimized are not perceived as, quote, real victims because of some circumstance or action of theirs which prevents society from viewing them as good. Think of Cyntoia Brown. So this is a Black American woman who at the age of 16 was enslaved to work as a prostitute and ultimately shot and killed one of her quote-unquote clients who raped her because she feared for her fucking life, right? So despite very clearly being the victim of sex trafficking in the truest sense of the word, because, even though sex work is work, if you're a fucking child, it's not work that you can meaningfully consent to, Brown was sentenced to life in prison for, quote-unquote, murdering her rapist. That sentence was eventually commuted to 15 years. Note that it was not overturned, it was just made shorter, following intense media scrutiny of her case. So I would argue that Brown's case shows very clearly what is at stake with modern victim narratives. By positioning victims as morally good, victims have to be good in order to be recognized as victims. There's just no room for any mess that might complicate that. And you can bet your life that race and class play a huge role in deciding who gets to be perceived as good and thus who gets to claim victimhood. And at the end of the day, having your victimhood recognized is a privilege afforded to very few. And that's my first issue with the whole trauma makes you strong trope, because it feeds directly into this black and white view of victimhood as if survivors are in some ways superheroes rather than just ordinary people with equally complex narratives as everyone else who just happen to have been unfortunate enough to have some very real shit happen to them. My second issue is that this narrative is just fundamentally untrue, right? Trauma does not make you strong. It does not make you some kind of superhero or martyr or symbol. Trauma, by definition, is something which is thoroughly destabilizing. It's something that can completely alter your sense of self, of reality, of your relationships. It can have lasting and incredibly damaging impacts on your personal life and can lead to behaviors which are dangerous both to yourself and to others. It's not like some kind of, vat of hazardous chemicals that you're temporarily submerged in and come out with superpowers. It's more like a sort of poison that alters your sense of self and infects every part of your life that you need to work very, very hard to suck out. So a few years ago, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder following a traumatic life event. And the process of recovering from PTSD did not feel like some kind of Herculean training montage. It felt like an incredibly vulnerable period of my life where I was extremely fragile and constantly having to monitor and work through triggers that I simply did not have before this traumatic event. To try and equate that struggle to basically just keep going day to day with strength or some kind of superhero type origin story is to detract attention from the structural issues which made this struggle necessary. And this is also what Anne Roth has to say on the obsession with the trauma of Holocaust survivors. She argues that by focusing on the redemption, or really the psychological journey of individual survivors, we forget or more often ignore the very real historical processes which pushed them into a position of survival in the first place. So our cultural obsession with the strength of victims also fundamentally erases those who could not be classed as strong. So let's be clear, to be a strong victim, you have to A, recognize that something fucked up has happened to you, and B, basically get really fucking mad about what's happened to you, mad enough to change the subsequent trajectory of your life. Now, this is just not the case for a huge number of victims, particularly victims of sexual violence. So, for example, the vast majority of people who experience sexual abuse as a child will not tell anyone until well into adulthood, if they ever tell anyone at all. Even further, some of the most common feelings expressed by both survivors of childhood sexual abuse and those who were assaulted as adults are not this kind of righteous anger, but feelings of guilt and feelings of shame. So what about the victims who don't come out angry, right? What about the people who never recover? I read a good tweet about this a few years ago, which I did try to find for the show, but I couldn't find it. So I'll paraphrase it. And it went something like, I'm here for the survivors who came out kicking and screaming, and I'm here for those who didn't. I'm here for the ones who came out softer, quieter, and more afraid. So thinking about my own personal relationships, I know many, many, many women who have been sexually assaulted, and not all of them came out kicking and screaming. In fact, I'd probably say that's the minority. Are they to be seen as in some way weak because of that? Clearly that would be unbelievably fucked up. And I think that that's fundamentally the problem with these tropes around strong women, right? They flatten the female experience in ways that have, repeatedly throughout history, allowed us to ignore the very real suffering of women. Whether that be what we saw happening during the era of slavery with tropes around strong Black women that were used to justify the extreme regimes of physical violence enacted against them, or whether that's today with what we see around the more ubiquitous trope of, the strong woman survivor, which fundamentally erases the complexity of victimhood and holds victims to unreasonable standards in order to have their experiences recognized.